Hello and welcome to a beautiful but what I would call bracing winter's day here in beautiful and sunny Nova Scotia. It's about -5 today, but as I said, there's no wind, the sun's streaming down on me, and it's January, so it's supposed to be cold. There's not a lot of jobs I can do in the garden at this time of year. Most of us around the world in the northern hemisphere at this time of year are sort of itching to get ourselves, into the garden and doing jobs, looking at seed catalogues, etc. But I've just been down the beach and collecting some seaweed to mulch all my veg beds, and that'll provide, over the next 4 or 5 months until I actually start planting in, May time, end of April maybe. That'll sort of rot down and provide some real good nutrients to the soil over the next few months. And as gardeners, we're always looking at ways that we can get an edge, get that little bit of extra nutrients into our beds to grow bigger and better and more vegetables and fruit, etc. throughout the year. So I thought I'd run down a few of the few tips, 4 or 5, 6 tips that I've got to help you improve your harvests and your yields this year and grow bigger and better veg. So obviously one of these is to mulch your beds in the wintertime, getting ready for the summer. As I said, here I've used seaweed, but it could so easily have been just a few inches of compost that you've made yourself or you've brought in, and that's going to provide those extra nutrients and leach down into the soil over the winter time, ready to sort of supercharge your soil itself throughout the summer, so that you don't have to actually put that much in the way of fertilizers, etc. into your soil. I'm an organic gardener, so I don't really put hardly any fertilizer at all other than the mulches that I put down over the autumn and winter time and early spring. I may use a bit of seaweed fertilizer, but nothing bought in. So mulch, number one tip, is a great thing, job you can be doing at this time of year, whether it be compost that you've bought in or compost from your actual compost bin, getting that down onto your beds, ready for the new planting season. And soil is one of the most important part of your raised bed, obviously, and what you grow your vegetables in, obviously, again, very, very important. So let's have a look. My next tip is the soil that you use in your veg beds. So soil, what it's made of, how much soil, etc. you've got, is the number one most important thing in your veg beds. It's the lifeblood of your plants. If you're actually about to make a new veg bed, and I should have put that in last week's top tips for making a veg bed, the soil that you put in there is obviously very important. You don't want to just use garden soil. My recommended mix for your optimum veg bed soil is a mix of sort of a third topsoil, a third garden compost and a third sand. Mix that all together and you've got a really good starting mix for your actual growing medium. It wants to be light enough to be able for the water to drain through and not be sodden, etc. But also it wants to be able to have a nice bit of organic material in there to be able to hold the water in the dry periods, so that your plants are not going thirsty. And obviously with a good bit of organic matter with your garden compost will help feed the plants throughout the season as well, without having to add too much extra fertilizer. And that's going back to that sort of mulch every year of So I mulch my beds in the autumn time or early spring with a nice couple of inches of garden compost on over all the beds. I get that from my compost bin, and a mix of that, and also this is a bit frozen because it was in the shade end of the greenhouse, but of rotted down, well, leaf mould basically. So I mix all that in as well, and that's really good, excellent stuff as well. So that's what I do in the autumn or the early spring. And so related again to the actual soil, but not what the soil is made of, is not digging the soil over. So I am a no-dig gardener. Charles Dowding has you know, done so much to sort of educate people around the world about this. And you know, what we do is we're basically never ever digging into the soil except to plant our plants. We're not digging it over like in the old days, double digging and really sort of getting it over. What we're saying nowadays is that, or what they say nowadays, and I'm just believing them, but it seems to work for me, is, you know, underneath the soil here is a whole city, country, world of small micro organisms, whether it be little insects, etc., or actual fungi, your mycorrhizal fungi, etc., creating a superhighway of roads for all these nutrients to be able to zip around underneath the earth to feed your plants, and your plants feed them. So there's a symbiotic relationship. Your plants feed these organisms underneath the ground, and then the organisms help to feed your plants in turn. And if we're digging the ground up all the time, then that is going to get in the way. That's going to kill off, break up all these roads of nutrients that are going back, zipping back and forth between plants. And if you know, some of these fungi can be actually miles long apparently. So we don't want to be digging them up. So instead of digging up and incorporating our fertiliser into the ground, what we're doing now is just laying a nice mulch of it over the top of compost every single year, and then you're just planting in that, and with my seaweed on top of that as well. That is just, you know, the nutrients are going into the soil, so you don't have to dig over. So as well as, you know, making sure that your compost is a good mix of compost and a bit of sand, a bit of topsoil, feeding that every year with a new couple of inches of compost is going to help your soil, which will in turn feed your plants. And then not digging up the soil at all is going to help the microorganisms underneath the earth to actually feed your plants. So this tip's more for when you're starting out, maybe filling a raised bed for the first time, and this will pay you back in spades in the years to come, is filling the raised bed with logs to start with at the base of it, etc., and other, it could be leaves, it could be lots of different organic material, filling it up with that, or partial filling before you put your compost in the what's called hugelkultur sort of method of raised bed gardening. And what that is going to do is, first of all, when there's a drought and, you know, there's not much rain coming around, water in the soil, it's gonna actually help your soil by, before that, when the rains come, it acts as a bit of a sump, soaking up water and then holding it there like organic matter does. And then when we're in a dry period, your plants can access that water because the logs, the old logs, etc., will start to release that moisture, and that will help your plants in those dry times. Also, as time goes on, the logs will rot down, the microorganisms that are in the earth, all the little critters, etc., will rot it down, and that will provide a really good, rich base for your plants' roots to get amongst later on in the years to come, with lots of nutrients in there. So that's again a really excellent way for you to be getting better harvests in the future as the logs rot down. We've set ourselves up well. We've got a nice bit of soil in there. We've got a nice high bed. You know, it's a couple of feet high, so we can grow all different types of plants, whether it be these leafy greens that don't actually need that much soil, or tomatoes later on in the season. So we've got the soil in there. We've got nice high beds, ready to go with the plants. So I've got these plants in here now, and that's all well and good. Sooner or later they're gonna want to go to seed, and then I'm gonna need to be ready with my next set of plants. I could just put seeds in, but that's wasting a bit of time there. So my next tip, succession planting. So looking ahead now, in the next couple of weeks, I want to be planting my seeds for tomatoes, chili peppers that need that long, have a long season and need to be planted nice and early, or as well, I want to be planting my next set of seeds for these Asian greens that will take over from these Asian greens. So when these start to get a bit older and a bit more bitter, I'm going to whip these out, and then I'll have some new plants to put straight in there in a succession planting format. And I want to be thinking about that all the way through the summer now. From now on, I need to be thinking a good 6 weeks ahead, maybe 2 months ahead, to make the maximum use of this bed, so that at all times it's full up and fully being utilised, so that I can keep growing plants and keep utilising them all the way through the season. So thinking ahead now, like I said, in the next couple of weeks I'm going to be planting or sowing seeds for my tomatoes and my chilies, and some more early greens, etc. And then I can whip these out, put the new ones straight in, and then thinking again for the next, in the autumn time, the fall time, so I will have, I think, chilies and tomatoes in this bed, maybe something else, not too sure, and they'll go all the way through the summer. I may put some things in between here and there, but my next sort of big thinking is going to be the autumn time. So what am I going to be putting in here in the autumn? Probably some broccoli, maybe some onions, etc. So 6 weeks, 2 months before I get ready in the autumn time, I need to have planted that broccoli, etc., ready to plant in here as soon as I've finished with the tomatoes. Succession planting, good stuff. So we're making use as most efficiently as possible with our beds, with our succession planting. But what am I doing now is I'm extending the season. This is not really the normal time in Nova Scotia to be growing greens, etc. Normally covered in white of snow, and you know we're not really bringing growing veg here until sort of May time. But what I'm doing here with this greenhouse, and also with this covering, is I'm extending the season. At this point, I'm extending the season at the front end of the season, and later on, when I'm talking about taking the tomatoes out, putting onions, broccoli, whatever I think about at that time of year, I'll be extending the season on the back end. Now, it doesn't have to be in a greenhouse. Your raised bed could just have a covering like this, maybe a couple of weeks in advance, just to start warming that soil up a little bit earlier. Maybe put some black cloth or some black bin bags across the soil, and then as the sun beats down onto that black, the black will absorb the heat, and that will warm the soil up and just give your plants that little bit of an extra edge when you plant them as early as you can plant them. You know, because I don't care what anybody says, even though things like these greens don't mind cool temperatures, no plants like cold ground. They like it, you know, nice and warm. The roots can get themselves going. So by warming the ground up early with either like a cloche, some covering, or you know, like a black covering over your actual the bed themselves, you're going to aid your plant growing quicker and getting itself acclimatised. And at the back end, like I said, adding this in will keep the frosts away, and you can grow that a little bit longer, whether you're in a greenhouse or not. Extend that season. So my next tip in helping you boost your yields in your raised beds this year is interplanting. And I don't even mean just interplanting your different veg. So traditionally we'll have a bed, or whether it be a garden bed or a raised bed, and we'll have all onions in there or all lettuce, etc. Another good way of boosting the yields of your actual veg and the health of that veg is planting different plants, basil and tomatoes, all together in one bed, mixing it up a bit. And what that's going to do will confuse nasty pests, etc. I think it's basil. If when you plant it with asparagus, that confuses the asparagus beetle, and your asparagus won't be attacked so much. So, like I said, planting them all together has a beneficial effect of confusing the pests. And even if one gets attacked, your other one isn't right next to it. So your other tomato plant, whether the first one got attacked, the other one's halfway down the other end of the bed, or in another bed, so it won't necessarily be attacked by the same pest. So that's a good way of helping your plants by interplanting them with different veg that are companions. And there's lots of lists, and I'm going to do a video before the season starts on companion planting and how that's beneficial. So we're not just talking about companion planting with regard to veg, you know, like basil and tomatoes and basil and asparagus, etc. What about flowers? Bringing in more flowers to your veg bed is beneficial, is going to boost your harvest, because they will attract more bees, etc., more pollinators, and those pollinators will obviously go from the flowers more easily to the veg. So the more visitors you get, the more chance your flowers are going to pollinate, and the more tomatoes you're going to get, etc., the more peas and all the different veg that are depending on the pollinators are going to do so much better, because there's going to be more pollinators there, basically. And that's always good, and that's why I always like putting what is it I've got there, what do we call it, coriander, whatever you call coriander, I can't remember off the top of my head. When that flowers, there's lots and lots and lots of flowers on that once it gets going, and I usually just let it crack on, because once those flowers come, you get lots and lots of pollinators, and it's not just bees, you know, it's the butterflies and all the little hoverflies, etc. And they're wonderful coming in to help boost your yields of your plants throughout the year. So there we go. There's a few different tips to help boost your raised bed gardens this year. Take those tips and I guarantee you'll have a much better harvest than if you hadn't taken them at all. So hopefully you'll find those useful. What you could do in return for me passing those tips to you is to smash that like button down there if you like the video, and if you haven't subscribed so far, please subscribe. Lots of videos coming out over the next summer, the next few weeks and months, in fact always. I shall hopefully return now. I'm in better health, return to at least 2 a week, hopefully building up to 2 a week anyway. So anyway, job's a good one. Oh, don't forget to check out my website, theoptimisticgardener.com. I'm busy building it up and hopefully getting lots of resources on there to help you, not just in video format, but in writing and in picture format too. So please visit that, theoptimisticgardener.com.